Okay, good evening. I'm just waiting for the screen sharing to be enabled so we can start. Just by way of a brief introduction, this shir is primarily intended at Yeshiva Bochum. I see it's been advertised more widely. You're welcome to listen in, but the primary focus of the shir is for Bochum. If anybody wishes, and I'm also not really going to be addressing most of those questions that seem to be mentioned in the various website articles. If anybody does want a specific share on those topics, they're welcome to contact me to organize a share for their Chabad house or location where they're founded. Let's get the screen sharing started. Okay, so this evening we're going to be looking a little bit at an introduction to medical ethics through the prism of Jewish belief and teachings. Hopefully by the end of the shir, you'll have a little bit of a better understanding of what the various factors are that need to be considered when somebody's looking at a medical issue in order to know what fact to present to the Rav. And you will also have a little bit of a better understanding of how Jewish medical ethics or Halocha diverges from the general worldview. So obviously, whenever we have an issue, we have a Masorah, we have a chain of tradition through which we can find the answers to our questions. If we look, we have the Torah, which is what you would consider statute law. So the Torah says, you shall not murder. But what does murder mean? How do we apply murder to various situations? How do we derive the Jewish position on euthanasia from leitzirtzach? What about situations perhaps when a woman is having a baby and the woman's life is in danger? What about a situation where somebody wishes to donate an organ to somebody else, but we're not 100% sure whether the person donating the organ is alive or dead? So we've got the pasuk that tells us leitzirtzach. How do we develop that? So we then have the shas that will elaborate and give us the benefit of the insight of Torah Shebal Peh on exactly what the pshat of the pasuk in the Torah is. This will be developed further by the Rishonim and the Achronim. But we will have situations where we won't find a clear halacha in the Shulchan Aruch that discusses our particular case. So, for example, organ donation isn't discussed in Shulchan Aruch. So how do we arrive at a conclusion? So we will look within the shilas and shuvas. Shilas and shuvas are what you would call, in an English term, case law. So we will look at how somebody has addressed this particular issue, and we will apply it to our case. In the same way as in case law, if somebody is a magistrate, that is not going to be binding on anybody else. If somebody is a regular judge, you may want to take it into account, but it doesn't have an enormous amount of weight. If somebody is a Supreme Court judge, you're going to have a very good case to argue that we are not listening to this precedent. So too, with the shut, it will depend who the Rav is. If it's one of the Poskei Hador, then that will be taken far more seriously than a tshuva written by a local Rav. We will try to tease out what is the precedent. How can we look at something within the Torah and derive a halacha from it for the 21st century? So, for example, you may look at the concept of donating a kidney to save somebody else's life, and you'll want to know whether this is permissible or not. And you look at the pasuk in the Torah that says, "Lo samed al dam le'echa," you may not stand idly by when somebody else's blood is being shed. If you've got the ability to help somebody, you've got to do so. And we'll then have to tease out what the parameters of that particular halacha is and how to apply to this situation. It's not always so straightforward, particularly when dealing with new techniques. There's often a sometimes justified fear of innovation. We find chodosh asa min haTorah. Osa chadoshes bal milchames. When you try and introduce something new, you'll come up against all sorts of obstacles. Is this the attitude that we should take? Do we say that medicine is something which is at odds with halacha, and any new technique is one that should be avoided? So we find the Tiferet Yisrael writes that when there are no clear grounds for prohibiting something, it's permitted. In other words, we don't start off with the attitude that something is asa unless we find a reason to be mad to it. We will start off from the point of view that as long as we don't have an issue which will tell us that it is asa, then we now need to start from that starting point and try to determine whether it is mutter or not. So we will embrace technology rather than starting from a point of view that it's automatically something that we should not be involved in. Indeed, the Yerushalmi in the Dorim writes that has a Torah not prohibited enough activities that you are seeking additional prohibitions. So we will seek to embrace medical breakthroughs whenever possible rather than rejecting them. The issues are complex and a combination of both approaches are needed, as indeed is evidenced by a careful examination of the writing of all the Gedolei HaPoskim, both today and in previous days. So let's start with the very fundamental question. Does pursuing a cure defy the Eibishter's Ratzon? Is there something wrong in trying to be cured? Should we just let nature take its place? It's not sufficient to make a decision based on gut feeling. We must find a halachic basis for anything that we are saying. So we find that the Rambam writes, "V'chein kol michshel sheyesh bo sakonas nefoshes, mitzvahs aseh la'asirei lishami mimenu v'lizor b'dover yofe yofe, shenami shom l'cho shmo nafshecha." So the Rambam tells us that we need to look after our health. Does this mean that we can consult a doctor? It's not quite so straightforward. The Rambam is primarily talking about preventative medicine. We mustn't abuse alcohol, we shouldn't be smoking, we should be following a sensible diet. The Rambam is telling us to avoid things that are dangerous. In this particular halacha, the Rambam isn't giving us a mandate to consult a doctor. Indeed, we find a pasuk, Ani Hashem Reifecha. Ani Hashem Reifecha. Hashem is, the Eibishter is a doctor. Surely that means that we've got a problem. How can we consult doctors if the Eibishter is our doctor? Indeed, we find another pasuk. Right? That the Eibishter is a doctor. The Eibishter is the one who deals out life and death. The Eibishter is the one who cures, and there is nobody else who will save you. So if that is indeed the case, what right do we have to consult with doctors? Surely that's going against the Ratzon of the Eibishter. Indeed, we find in Divrei Hayomim, it tells us, Vayechla asa b'shna shleishim v'teishim al chusay b'raglov ad l'mayla cholyo v'gam b'cholyo lo dorash es Hashem ki b'reifim. That King Asa grew ill, and he consulted with the doctors, and this is reported in a negative manner, as if he did something wrong by consulting the doctors. Indeed, we find the Gemara in Psachim, Nun Vav Amud Aleph tells us that Chizkiyahu Melech hid the Sefer Refuos. The Chachamim, that the Chachamim agreed and praised him for his actions. The Sefer Refuos was a Sefer that contained cures for various illnesses. And he hid it away, and he was praised for doing so. Again, this seems to imply that consulting a doctor is problematic. But we find another pasuk. So we find the pasuk, Rapper Yerapper. If one person is assaulting another person and wounds him, the assailant is obligated to pay for the cure, for the doctor's fees of the victim. If we look in the Gemara, so the Gemara Baba Kama Peyam Aleph tells us, right? V'rapa yirapa, the Tanya Dibei Rabbi Yishmael. Omer v'rapa yirapa mikan shenitin reshus l'reifa l'rapis. That from this we see that a doctor has got permission to heal. And indeed, Rashi comments, and we don't say the Eibishter has wounded us, and therefore the Eibishter will be the one to cure us. And the Tosfos then takes it a step further. And Tosfos says, very nice. We see that a person has damaged somebody else, and therefore we are allowed to heal them. But that is a case of a illness inflicted by another person. Does that mean that we have the ability to heal an illness afflicted by the Eibishter? And that's what Tosfos writes of Amar B'lechudosh Amin Lei. V'yesh leima dehava amina hanim mili maka b'dei Adam aval chayli haba b'dei Shemayim k'shemar b'kaseisik zeres hamelech kol mashma lon d'shari. So Tosfos writes that we might have thought that this only applies to an illness inflicted by another human being, but if the illness is in the b'dei Shemayim, we don't have the right to interfere. Kol mashma lon d'shari. We see that it is permitted, it's not considered to be interfering with the Eibishter. Indeed, from this we learn, therefore, that we are not only allowed to consult with a doctor when the illness is a result of an action by a human being, but even if it's an illness that has no human cause, we can consult doctors. The doctors have permission to heal. And it's interesting, the Rebbe picks up on this and comments that we learn another very powerful statement from this. Doctors have got permission to heal and not to inflict bad news, not to give up hope, not to convey to the patient that their case is hopeless. Betach yeduloi, my moran shall come in the Siyenu Abisenu HaKadosh, al Maimon Razav Rapa Yerapa, Shenitu Rashus L'Reifa L'Rapis, Shirak Zehu HaKerch VaSamcha Sheyesh L'Reifa L'Rapis. This is the gift, the power, the permission that's given to a doctor to heal. Binyan Shavafua, Befrat Sharefa Shei Gamke in Mas with a Chavitas, a pessimist, and a for Klal Hachlish Atikva Teva. Befrati Projects, who be on Menu, Elub Shayem Yem is Hajim, Trufas Hadoshis, Blochim Hadoshim Yone Rafua. So the Rebbe writes very clearly that the privilege given to a doctor is to heal. The privilege isn't given to a doctor to convey negative news. The poskim look at other issues. That there are poskim who writes that from this posuk we learn that doctors have the permission to charge for their treatment. The Sitz Eliezer writes that we learn from this an obligation to actually have regular eye checks, for example, eye tests to ensure that our eyesight is of a good standard. And therefore, what we find is we look at the permission that has been granted to heal. We've established that this permission is granted not only when the Eibishter, when a human being is struck, but even when the Eibishter is struck. And indeed, this is a good example of the difficulties of translating something. Because if you look in English, right, Rapa Yerapa will generally be translated in English as you must provide for his cure. In the English, you lose the nuance of the original Lashon HaKodesh, Rapa Yerapa. The whole diuk is in the double Lashon, in the duplication of the word Rapa Yerapa. Why does it have to say both? It could have just said Rape. And therefore, we see from here the importance of actually learning something in the original Lashon. Rambam takes this a step further and clarifies it a little bit more. So the Rambam writes in Pirsha Mishnayis, Psachim, Perik Dal, Mishnah Tes, in Ro'i Vodom, V'pona ala lechem v'ochlei, shemisrapa meisa tzag godu bli sofek, he'im nema shehisi b'tchonim Hashem. V'vei yem alehem, ki kamesh ani meidel Hashem beisa eichel, shehimsu li b'dova lahasir aveni, lach yisani l'kaimeni, kach neida lo yashehimsu v'fuah ma'pa, es machlasi kish tamishba. If somebody's hungry, and he turns to bread to eat it, and he's now cured from his dreadful hunger, will we say that he has removed his bitachon in Hashem? Should he be saying, I trust in God to stop me being hungry? We'll tell such a person they're a fool. Just like we thank God when we eat, that God has given us something to remove our hunger, to allow us to live, to preserve us, so we thank God when he provides a medicine that is curing our illness when we utilize it. So what we see is that the Eibishter, as the sustainer of life, means that the Eibishter has given us all the resources necessary to be able to procure food and stay alive. Similarly, the Eibishter as the Reifer, Ani Hashem Reifecha, means that he's made available to us everything necessary in this world to bring about a cure. So therefore, doctors, physicians, healthcare workers are seen as agents, shluchim of the Eibishter, endowed by him with all the tools they need to heal the sick. Therefore, when people are ill, they should daven to ask that he grants success to his shluchim in finding and administering the cure. And when the treatment has been successful, we must thank the Eibishter for allowing this to happen. Indeed, we find a statement in the Gemara, Tov shebareifim leb Gehenna. An amazing statement. The best of doctors are going to burn in hell. What's going on over here? What does it mean, Tov shebareifim? The doctor who believes that he is so good that he doesn't need any help, that's the doctor who's destined for Gehenna. The doctor who can accept that he's a partner of the Eibishter, that is indeed the one who will receive the Eibishter's blessing. Indeed, we find Tov, right? Tov is 17. The Shemona Esrei is 18 brachas. Take out, excluding the Amashinim. What does it mean, Tov shebareifim? The Reifa who only has 17 brachas, who doesn't say Rufa Einu, who doesn't recognize that he is a shliach of the Eibishter, is the Reifa who is destined to Gehenna. But the Reifa who sees himself as a shliach that the Eibishter has placed in this world to discover the treasures that are hidden in nature to allow us to be healed from an illness, that is the true shliach of the Eibishter. And that's shown bitachon, that we believe that God has hidden within nature the ability to find a cure. Shulchan Aruch, Yehuda, writes, the Torah has given a mandate to doctors to heal. This is a mitzvah, and including the category of saving a life, a doctor who withholds their services is considered to have been complicit in shvichas damim. The Chidah writes that we cannot rely on miracles, and a sick person is duty-bound to conduct themselves in accordance with the natural order by calling on a physician to heal themselves. In fact, to depart from the general practice by claiming greater merit than previous doros who were cured by doctors is almost sinful on account of the implied arrogance and the reliance on a nest when there's a danger to life. One should adopt the darchei kol adam and go to a doctor when you need so. Indeed, there's if we look in the Yagdal Torah, in Yagdal Torah of Sivan Tammuz Tovshim Mem, Shana Dalad, Chelak Hey. So there's brought down in the name of the Alter Rebbe. Shamati b'shem Rabbeinu zal be'inyan harafuas. Harambam zal seva the ein rishus l'rapis mechushay pnimi. This permission to doctors to heal all illnesses is not muskim on all the poskim. There were poskim, the Rambam, for example, writes that a doctor doesn't have rishus to heal an internal illness. Umasha kosav rapa yirapa hainu ke'evu makechitzeni. V'chein kosav Ibn Ezra. בפרש על הטבע פרשה בפוסק ורפה ירפה, שניתן רשוס לרייפה לרפס המכה שביד פצועים שמבחוץ. אך כל חלי ומכה שמבפנים בגוף היד, בגוף ביד השם לרפס, that is in God's hands to heal. וכמו שכוסף כי יחי ויחבש, וכסיב בעשו גם בכל יום לא ידורש השם כי ברייפים. הרי שנחשב לי לאובן דבר זה שדורש ברייפים. עד כאן לשון אבן עזרא. So Ibn Ezra is writing that we shouldn't be going to a doctor when it is an issue of an illness that's inflicted by the Eibishter. For Rambam Zal Hesiv Lahavi Raya Lazeb Mashamra Zal Psachim Soifberg Mokim Shanagu Chizkiya Gonov Seif Refuas Vahodulay Hari the also lasting Refuas by Rambam Apirish Hatorah Bakdamasi. So the Rambam also writes that there are certain illnesses that we should not be going to doctors for. The Rambam actually differs and is cholek on the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra and writes that it is actually permitted. Why was Osa considered to have done something wrong? He didn't ask the Eibishter, he didn't daven, he went directly to the doctors. For Sefer Refuah Shagonas Chizkiya, why did Chizkiya Melech hide away the Sefer Refuahs? Hainu Sefer Medir Tzuras HaKechavim V'Talam Soyes Shesur Pleinis M'Rapa Micheli Pleini V'Zara Karv Lahatis Abris Achri Avodah Zarah. The reason why was because people didn't understand how to utilize it properly, and it was an Avodah Zarah. They were falling into possible pagan practices. Ayin Shama Pirsham is nice, so we take this Yontov, so it's Peg Makim Shinagu. In other words, the Sefer Refuahs per se was not problematic, it was how they were utilizing it. Aval Refuah Shedei Samim, Refuahs Hativim, treatment through medication and natural treatment is mutter. As we quoted earlier from the Rambam, that if somebody eats bread and stops his hunger, will that stop him having a munah? Rabbeinu HaGadol Hichriya, Mizman HaBaya Shoy Chaim Yisrael B'Chai Eliki, Lo Yimekam Nechayis L'Gufim Kumi Aydei Nefesh L'Kis Levada. V'lochein Ein Tzorach L'Askim B'Fur She'im Mashlim V'Mach Mitzvah Zasu V'Shtal L'Yisasei K'Tikunam She'b'dei Nishlemu Tarig Evorei Nefesh L'Kis. As we Meila Gam V'Mach Evorei Gufim Sh'Sagidim Hei B'Shleimus. So the Alter Rebbe writes, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when people lived ruchniistic lives, and their chayis was from the nefesh elikis, and therefore they did need to go to doctors, because as long as they were fulfilling the Ramach mitzvahs asay and his sam mitzvahs leis asay exactly as they should be, that provided all the life force needed for the body as well. So that is in the time of the bias. And the pegamin ruchnias will be mele cause a pegamin gashmias. For his klal, which no medicine will help. And this is what it writes about Asa, that he didn't speak to Hashem, he spoke to the Reifim. Since he didn't turn to Hashem to be mashlim, the Tarya Gevori Nafshe, what's the point of going to the doctors? But, and this is the vital part, Bisman HaGolus, Shegomu B'Maseim, so Golus HaShchina, Sheyod HaShpasim Nislabsha, B'Yud Tzvius D'Neiga. Vayideza Mava Mazolis Usvar Shman Mekable Chayusam Gama Bali Chaim Tzemech Mkein Gama Odam Afsha Ina Mashlim Tarya Gevoi Nafshe Day Mitzvahs Masa Mitzvahs Canal Yochel Gamkel Lekabel Chayus Legufim Nesha Bahamis Kumei Shah Bali Chaim Vodmu Bal Bachim Lekabel Chayus Vashmasim Mecholis Hasitra Achla Chas V'Shalom Mecholis HaKdusha Kumei Shekosim Bigas HaTshuva Perik Vov. So the Alter Rebbe writes that nowadays we are not on that gashmiistic, on that ruchniistic level, and therefore we need to consult with doctors to ensure that the pagam that we've caused by our lack of observance of the mitzvahs is rectified through a doctor. So the obligation to safeguard our health plus the permission to seek a cure leads to an obligation to seek healing. So in answer to our first question, we've analyzed the psukim in the Torah. We've looked at how the Gemara elucidates that pasuk. We've looked how the Rishonim and Achronim elaborate, and we've arrived at a conclusion that it is not only permissible, but a mitzvah and an obligation to go to a doctor when a person is ill. Now let's have a look for a moment at how halacha and secular ethics diverge. The key element of secular ethics is what's known as autonomy. The famous quote from Judge Cardozo, every human being of adult years and sound might has a right to determine what shall be done with his own body. This is the foundation of secular ethics. We have inviolable rights. We have a right, and we are entitled to choose how we behave. In halacha, we look at it the exact opposite. We're required to safeguard our life because it's not our property to forfeit at will. Halacha describes a man as being given a loan of our body. We've got to utilize our body to the fullest extent possible, but nobody, not a third party and not oneself, is permitted to destroy the body that we've been loaned by the Eibishter. Quite the contrary, everyone is enjoined to preserve that life and to promote the divine purpose served by the guf that was being united with our neshama. So secular law says we've got the right to choose. Halacha tells us that we've got an obligation to take care of our life because it is not ours. So secular ethics is primarily concerned with who gets to make the decision. So the courts are preoccupied with advanced directives, surrogate decision-making, ethics committees, institutional review boards, and so on, because what we want to know is who has the ability to make that decision. The primary value the law seeks to enshrine is the autonomy of the individual. Once we identify the who, we have no interest in the what. As long as you are competent to make a decision, what your decision is immaterial. It can be utterly illogical. It makes no difference. You are the one who gets to make that decision. So if you wish to end your life, you're allowed to, and that's the rationale behind many countries and states allowing assisted suicide, because you can choose what to do with your body. Once you've made that decision, nobody else can interfere. Halacha is not looking at who makes a decision. We look at what the halacha is. Once we've identified what the halacha is, then the personal identity of or predilections of the decider is irrelevant. Whether we agree or not is irrelevant. Secular law talks about rights. Halacha talks about obligations. Secular law asks who decides. Jewish law asks what is to be decided. And we will see the ramifications of this. The secular law enshrines the right of an individual to choose between various alternatives presented to them. They can choose whether to accept the treatment, whether to refuse the treatment, whether to take a treatment that has a higher level of success, a lower level of success. It's the right of the individual to decide what to do. You can research on the internet, come to the doctor, and tell the doctor exactly what it is that you want them to do. In halacha, we find that autonomy is voluntarily limited because we have, by our bechira, chosen to do the ratzon of the Eibishter. Decisions that have to be made are consistent with halacha. And these decisions should be made in consultation with a Rav who's a baki in halacha and a baki in the particular topic of halacha to provide you with the necessary advice regarding your decisions. Let's look at a practical example. Treatment. A cornerstone of medical practice is that there is no need to provide futile treatment, something which does not benefit the patient. After the family's had a chance to say goodbye, there's no value to it. The resource invested in futile treatment for one patient denies opportunity to others who may benefit in a resource-limited environment. And we've seen lots of discussion around this in the present crisis, when there may be a shortage of ventilators. Who's given the ventilator? What's the point of putting somebody on a ventilator or investing an enormous amount of resources in round-the-clock nursing and so on, when we think that perhaps the patient will not recover fully, perhaps the patient will only live for another few weeks? Is there any value in investing in such treatment? To whom is the persistence of care without hope of success and benefit? In terms of ethics and secular law, a physician's opinion that treatment is futile lessens their obligation to the patient. The only problem is that a claim of futility is supposed to rest on reasonable medical judgment. The problem is that physicians themselves disagree about the type of clinical evidence necessary to support this reasonable medical judgment. Doctors often disagree not only about the likelihood of treatment success, but also about the value of certain outcomes. Some doctors would consider a treatment futile if all it could provide was a chance to survive a couple of weeks. Others would consider this a reasonable goal. Dying patients might consider this lengthening of their lives a supreme value. Who wants to live to 104? Normally a person of 103. So what secular law might see as futile might not be seen as futile by the eyes of Halocha. A key element is that we do not know. We are humans. Generally, and in my experience, the more senior a physician, the more humble they are and the more they are prepared to listen to other points of view. If I had £5 for every time that I was called up and told, Rabbi, please come quickly, the patient is not going to survive the next few hours. And 2 weeks later, the patient was still alive. And £5 for every time I was told you don't need to rush, you can come tomorrow, towards the end of life, but no major issues at the moment, and that patient passed away that very same day, I could retire very happily without having any money worries. Because anybody involved in medicine knows that we do not know. So to say that any treatment is futile is something which is a statement which is very difficult to make. Also, how do we determine futility? Yes, a patient may decide, a secular law may decide it's futile. In England, we use something which is known as QALYs, Quality Adjusted Life Year Span. When we want to determine whether a treatment should be utilized or not, they will look at the cost of that treatment against the added benefit to that patient's life. So therefore, if somebody is young and an intervention can give them another 20 years of life, that intervention will be graded very high. If somebody is extremely elderly and the intervention is not going to cure them, but merely prolong their life by a couple of months, that intervention will be graded very low. In Halacha, we know that life is of infinite value. If something is infinite, then a day of life is as valuable as a year of life. And we cannot say that a treatment is futile because it's not going to provide an absolute cure. And if we want to look at how the slippery slope works, there's a medical condition called PVS, persistent vegetative state. A patient in persistent vegetative state is not going to recover. You'll read of all sorts of stories where they've recovered. Primarily, it was locked-in syndrome or other situation. It's quite difficult to accurately diagnose PVS. But what that patient is 100% alive. That patient is occupying a bed. That patient is occupying a lot of resources of the hospital. So here in England, they came up with a wonderful idea. We're going to redefine nutrition and hydration as medical treatment. A patient in PVS cannot feed themselves. They need to be fed by somebody else or fed through a tube. And therefore, if we can define feeding as a medical treatment, PVS has no cure, and therefore the feeding will not cure them. It's therefore a futile treatment, and we can stop feeding them, and hey presto, we've got rid of that person. Halacha would say that's absolute murder. English law would say it's justified because it's futile treatment. We know and we read that even one moment of life has tremendous value. So this is one of the areas where halacha diverges from secular law in the importance we place on even a short amount of time. If we look at life, we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of life? So if we look at it from a secular view, life is valuable because it is contributing to society. And therefore, somebody who is no longer able to contribute to society, their life has no value. And that is the underpinning of the permission for euthanasia and the various other practices of shortening a life. Judaism insists that life is intrinsically valuable because the Torah teaches us that a person was created but Tselem Elikim. The essence of a person is from the Eibishter and therefore has value. Unlike the secular perspective, which asserts that consciousness is a source of life's value, the Jewish perspective asserts that life is considered a gift with intrinsic worth, independent of cognitive function. What's one of the offshoots of this? One of the offshoots is playing itself out at the moment in the field of organ donation. In order to remove an organ, in order to retrieve an organ for transplantation, the law is that you have to have what's called the dead donor rule, that the person from whom you're retrieving the organ needs to be dead. As a result, death was redefined as brain death to allow a person's organs to be retrieved even when their heart is still beating. There's a massive debate about it among medical professionals, among the ethicists. I'm not going to get into the brain death controversy this evening. I just want to show you how it moves on a stage from there. There are many ethicists who say today that retrieving organs and organ transplantation is so valuable and such a powerful arsenal in the curing of illness that we should actually do away with the dead donor rule. As long as that person isn't going to recover, we should allow that person's organs to be retrieved. In other words, because life has no value when it is no longer a productive life, if that person is at the end of life and they are 100% not going to be recovering, even though they are 100% alive, we should be allowed to retrieve the organs and end that person's life to serve the greater good that we want. Halacha would say 100% that is absolute murder. So an example of where halacha is diverging from the secular view of ethics. Sanctity of life means that the value of life can't be completely accounted for in terms of a person's experiences and beliefs. There's therefore a value to a person simply being alive, no matter what state that person is in. Even, for example, in a state of permanent unconsciousness, their life is still of value. We don't possess absolute title to our life or to our body. We're charged with preserving, dignifying, and hallowing our lives. We're obligated to seek food and sustenance in order to safeguard the life we've been granted. When falling victim to illness or disease, we're obligated to seek a cure in order to sustain life. The category of pikuach nefesh extends to human life of every description and classification, including the feeble-minded, the mentally deranged, and even a person in a vegetative state. The halachas of Shabbos and so on are suspended on behalf of such people, even though there may be no chance for them to serve the Eibishter, to be Mekayim a mitzvah in the traditional manner, or to help somebody else. The mitzvah of pikuach nefesh is neither enhanced nor diminished by virtue of the quality of the life preserved. And if you look, for example, in practical terms, one of the greatest causes of people with cancer dying is not from the cancer. They will die with the cancer, not from the cancer. What they will very often die from is pneumonia. because their immune system is so weak and they will contract pneumonia, and the healthcare system will decide they're so ill, there's no point in treating the pneumonia. Let's be kind to them and let the illness take its course. Halacha is very clear that the mitzvah of saving a life is neither enhanced nor diminished by virtue of the quality of the life preserved. Does that mean that in every single situation we must take every measure to preserve life? This is a very, very nuanced situation. In halacha, people like to think in terms of black and white. The reality is that there is a massive expanse of grey in between, and the poskim have differing opinions onto exactly what we need to do, whether we need to have heroic interventions to save a person's life, whether we are entitled to withhold treatment. There is a massive difference between withholding treatment and withdrawing treatment. Withholding means not actively starting something. So not in every situation is there a chiyuv gomor, for example, to place a person on a life support machine. What we are clear of is that withdrawing is almost always totally asa. So if we've put somebody on a life support machine, whether or not that was the right decision, once we've placed them on it, it's extremely problematic to withdraw it. As a general rule, the three criteria that the poskim discuss with regards to deciding whether we should be engaging in what's termed as heroic interventions to preserve life at all costs is, number one, the person must have an incurable terminal illness. Number two, the life expectancy must be less than 6 months. And number three, that person must be suffering from pain which cannot be treated with palliative care. If all those three conditions are present, then when a posek is consulted, a rav who's a mumcha in medical halacha, there may be situations where the rav will say that not every intervention is required. But what is clear is withdrawing of life support is a totally different situation, and withholding basic nutrition and hydration is not permitted in any situation. So if we look at the different words of the poskim, Moshe Feinstein writes that in a situation where the treatment will not cure and will simply prolong the suffering, then he writes in Igros Moshe Cheshem Misbech Chelek Beis, in Shuvah Ayin Gimel and Shuvah Ayin Hey, that the treatment does not need to be given if indeed the patient decides that is what they want. The Sitz Eliezer, Chelek Hey, writes that we have an obligation to gain the extra moments of life at all costs, even if the patient is suffering. And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach takes a middle position in Milchas Shlomo Chelek Aleph, Shuvah Tzadi Aleph. He writes, similar to Rav Moshe, although he suggests the explaining to the patient of the value of even a moment of life and trying, if possible, to persuade the patient to agree to heroic interventions, even if it will cause pain. So we see that within the poskim, there are differing opinions as to what level of intervention we're required to make in a situation where a person is fitting all these three criteria. What's clear is that this is specific to these situations. Most of the situations that we deal with don't tick all those three boxes. Very often a hospital will wish to withdraw or withhold treatment simply because a patient is elderly. And this, Derech Agav, is the importance of having an advocate for the patient at all times. Just from a practical point of view, the hospital will treat a patient far more seriously when there is somebody at their side. And in these situations, ask a rav, there are even situations where you'll be allowed to Mechal Shabbos to be by a patient. Every case must be judged on its merits, and the shaila must be asked in every single situation. But the added value of having somebody there by the patient is unestimable, and the treatment that patients will be given will be very different when they see that there is somebody there. Often this isn't the fault. Now, not to portray doctors and nurses as chas v'sholom not having people's best interests. Doctors and nurses are angels. They're tzaddikim in human form, who are doing the absolute best for patients in very, very, very difficult situations, overworked, understaffed, under-resourced, and sometimes it's not possible to be by every patient at every moment of the day. And therefore, again, that's why it's so valuable for people to be there and to support the patient through their needs. Let's look at some of the issues that are in the news at the moment, and how these reflect on halacha. So one of the areas is medical research. You'll often encounter situations where people will wish their bodies to be donated for medical research. The reality is that there is an enormous amount of abuse, and people will think that they're selling their body for research to help save people's lives, and often the exact opposite is being done. It's being used for all sorts of purposes which have no direct benefit to human being. Even if they do, the halacha is absolutely 100% clear that there is no permission to donate a body for medical research. A person must be given kavura in their entirety. Here we go, another one, assisted suicide. So you had a scientist in Australia who was 104 years old, not suffering from senior illnesses, but was worried that he would become dependent on others and didn't want to become a burden on other people. And therefore he decided to travel to Switzerland, where he could be given assisted suicide. Again, the halacha absolutely forbids any form of assisted suicide, and this would be 100% forbidden. An interesting shaila that crops up is what would happen if you live in a state or a country where assisted suicide is permitted and you are a Jewish doctor. What do you have to do? Are you allowed to assist in this practice, even though halacha says it's shvichas damim? And the answer is quite clear, that you are not allowed to assist with any of these activities, and you'd be obligated to change your speciality to become a pediatrician, a gynecologist, whatever else, a general practitioner. You would not be allowed to be party to something which is 100% osa against halacha. A slight spin-off of that is, again, to demonstrate a difference between withdrawing and withholding. There are certain groups of goyim who do not accept blood transfusions. So what happens if somebody's come into the emergency room and they're wearing a bracelet which says, I do not wish, I'm a member of this group, I don't wish to receive a blood transfusion. And they've got a stab wound, something which a blood transfusion can absolutely save their life. If you intervene and give them the blood transfusion, you can be accused of assault and battery and lose your medical license. In a situation like that, there may be room to say, and again, every shaila is different, but there may be room to say that you are not actively involved at all. You're not withholding any treatment. You're not doing anything to this patient. You're simply not intervening. There may be room to say that you're entitled to not intervene in order to allow you to retain your license and save many other lives. But again, as with everything, this is a nuanced topic. Human head transplants. Medical science is constantly pushing the boundaries. Are we allowed to carry out head transplants? There's another issue that we have to look at here, which is mitzvah haba ba'aveira. Are we allowed to benefit from a medical breakthrough that's been carried out through murder? Many of these initial operations are going to result in the virtual immediate death of the person on whom the operation was carried out. In the early years of heart transplantation, when Moshe Feinstein deemed it as double murder, you were murdering the donor and you were murdering the recipient. The life expectancy was very short. Are we allowed to benefit from medical treatment that is being carried out and is now successful because of dubious experimentation in the earlier years? Or let's look at another shaila. What about receiving an organ in a situation when halacha didn't allow it to be retrieved? Can we, in other words, can we receive an organ if we cannot give it? The various poskim discuss this shaila. Is there a direct link? Is the mitzvah baba, is there a direct link between the ritzicha of the donor and the hatzalas achayim of the recipient? Do we say that the organ would be retrieved anyway, whether or not we accept it? If we don't accept it, it'd be given to the next patient on the line. There's various discussions. There are some poskim who say it's forbidden. The poskim say that certainly when we know that the organ has come from a yid, it's forbidden to accept it. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach writes that if the organ has come from a goy, or we're living in a country where the vast majority of people are goyim, and we don't know where the organs come from, and therefore we can be samech that it's come from a goy, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach paskins that it's mutter to accept that organ. Therefore you could have a heart transplant or a lung transplant and so on. There are other poskim that have a problem with it. If we look, certainly in this country, there was a massive scandal about what was known as the Liverpool pathway, where they were implementing a protocol where when somebody was approaching the end of life, they would withdraw all treatment, withdraw nutrition and hydration, and allow the person, in their words, to die with dignity. Now, the reality is, anybody who's been involved in healthcare will know there's no such thing as dying with dignity, and certainly withholding hydration and nutrition from a patient isn't going to allow them to die with dignity. And there's a massive fuss about it. And again, it's very, very clear that halacha does not allow the withholding of nutrition and hydration. There may be very specialized situations, certainly in situations where there's cardiac failure, when hydration may actually exacerbate the situation. And in those situations, the doctors and rabbanim need to be consulted exactly as to what to do. Sometimes subcutaneous hydration is a possible alternative. There's various other ways of dealing with it, but every single situation must be looked at on its particular facts, because one tiny little difference in the detail can mean a massive difference to the end psak halacha. What about when parents and the state disagree over a child's medical treatment? There were many, many cases that hit the news here in England recently where the parents wanted a particular treatment and the doctors felt it wasn't in the patient's best interest. The law is that the doctors are the ones that make the decision. And if they believe that the treatment is futile, they're not obligated to offer that treatment. Autonomy means that a person can refuse treatment. It doesn't mean that they can demand treatment. There have been cases when they've made a mistake. There was a famous case in England of a little baby called Charlotte Wyatt, who was born very prematurely in Southampton, and the doctors refused to treat. They put a DNR treatment, a do not resuscitate note on the baby's notes. The parents went to court, and the parents lost, and the baby survived. And the parents went to court again, and the parents lost. And this went on for a while until the baby was actually old enough to be discharged from the hospital. And to the best of my knowledge, that child is still alive today, must be now about 12 years old. So there are situations when the doctors do get it wrong, but the secular law says that it is the right of the doctors to decide. Halacha would say it's not the right of the parents, it's not the right of the doctors. What both the parents and the doctors have to do is do what is in the child's best interest to provide a cure. So, for example, if a hospital says that a child has a particular type of Yanamachla and the chemotherapy can cure it, and the parents say, no, we're naturopaths, we don't want chemotherapy, we insist on giving our child herbs and so on, the halacha would say that the parents' wishes are ignored in a case where the treatment is a treatment that is bodek or manusa, a proven treatment, and the parents would not be able to object to the child being given this treatment. Let's look back at organ donation a moment. There's a massive shortage of organs. The organ that is needed the most is a kidney. About 85% of all organ transplantations are kidneys. Kidneys are something that we are all born with 2 of them, and we only need 1. So as long as a person is healthy and does not have a family history of kidney disease and so on, and there's no medical counterindications, most young healthy people can donate a kidney. So theoretically, there should never be a shortage of kidneys. There are millions and millions of people in this world, far more healthy people who can donate kidneys than ill people who need them. Why is there such a shortage? Perhaps if we incentivize people to donate an organ, that would increase the demand. Is this allowed? So the ethicists have massive debates about it, and they have big problems. It removes the altruism. Treatment should be done because you're doing it for the mitzvah and so on. What does Halacha say? Halacha says that the fact that you've been paid for doing a mitzvah has not detracted from your mitzvah, and Halacha would not have a problem with paying somebody to donate an organ. Or what about the fact that there may be abuses of the system? That doesn't change the halacha. What that does is impose a requirement on us to put safeguards in place to ensure the halacha isn't abused. So there was a case where somebody came to a Moshe Feinstein and said, I can't afford to have this baby. Please can I have permission to terminate because I can't afford to have the baby. When Moshe's checked, there's no risk to the lady's health and so on. I said, I'm very sorry. You cannot terminate the pregnancy, but your problem is now my problem. In other words, the Kehillah has an obligation to make sure you've got the money to look after this baby. In the same way, if we can organize payment for supplying organs, and that will be matzah nefashos, then maybe that's something we should look into. The fact that there are all sorts of regulations we need to put in place to make sure that the poor are not abused and so on, means that we need to break our head over finding ways to put this regulatory system in place. But if the halacha would allow it, then the fact that there are problems that need to be overcome doesn't deflect from the halacha. It means that we've got this obligation to try and find the ways to allow it to happen. Another way where halacha has actually allowed a situation to improve is in the case of post-mortems. Often when a person dies in an unexplained manner, the law will require that that body is given an autopsy to determine what the cause of death is. Medical technology has advanced to a level where an MRI scan, a non-invasive imaging scan of the body, can often produce sufficient information to provide the cause of death without any desecration of the body. And this is a partnership that's worked well in England and is now actually being incorporated into the law, that by law in England, the authorities must allow a MRI scan to be conducted. And if that MRI scan provides sufficient information, then an invasive post-mortem may not be carried out. Interestingly, one of the early references to post-mortem was from a doctor in England. A doctor in England in the 1700s sent a shaila to the Yehуда Yehuda. Yehuda, the Rav in Prague, was asked a question. There was a doctor who'd carried out surgery on a patient to remove bladder stones, and the operation had failed and the patient had died. And the doctor wanted to know whether they could carry out a post-mortem to determine what had gone wrong to help them in the future. The response of the Yehуда Yehuda was, if there is chayla lefonenu, if there is a patient in front of us at the moment, meaning that there is somebody in the hospital right now who this treatment will provide knowledge that can save that chayla, then we can carry out the post-mortem. But just to carry out the post-mortem on the chance that the treatment might help somebody in the future would not be allowed. In other words, the Yehуда Yehuda said that there's a direct linkage between the act of Chilul Shabbos, or the act of putting the halacha on a side, with the saving of the life. So an example would be Hatzalah could jump in their car jump in their motorbike as soon as they get a call to save a life. What they can't do is cruise around the neighborhood the entire Shabbos just in case they may receive a call. So there needs to be a direct link between the act of putting the mitzvah on a side, suspending the mitzvah, and the act of pikuach nefesh. Alternative medicine. What's the halacha with regards to alternative medicine? Are we allowed to utilize alternative medicine to save somebody else? Or to move on to the next one, vaccinations. Are vaccinations mandatory or optional? It was big news in America recently when you had the measles outbreak, and there were many people who were saying that vaccinations are problematic and we don't want, and it's our choice. The position of almost all poskim is very clear that vaccination is mandatory. That we do not, the fact that we have decided that this is something that we don't want. Remember, all the way back at the beginning, Halacha deals not with rights, but with obligations. And we have an obligation, not to allow a situation to arise which will cause harm to somebody else. If we do not vaccinate, if we don't reach a level of herd immunity, then somebody who cannot be vaccinated because they have got an immunocompromised immunosystem. So, for example, they may have had a organ transplantation and so on, and they cannot be vaccinated. Their life is at risk because of our refusal to vaccinate. And therefore, the halacha is very clear that vaccination is obligatory. I wrote a essay on this, and the volume of hate mail I got afterwards was more than I've ever had for any other statement I've had ever. But I stand absolutely by my statement. And as I said, the vast majority of Rabbanim are absolutely unequivocal on this issue, that vaccination is mandatory. And our personal feelings are not taken into account. What about alternative medicine? It will depend whether it is alternative medicine which has a proven track record or whether it is alternative medicine which does not. There is much less regulation of alternative medicine than there is of traditional medicine. This isn't to brand all practitioners of alternative medicine as quacks, chas v'sholem. There are many, many practitioners of alternative medicine who are great shluchim of the Eibishter. But there are, due to the lack of regulation, there are many who are quacks. And what the basic line of halacha is that if there is a treatment that is boduk manusa in traditional medicine, we may not reject that treatment in the hope of following a alternative medicine. So, for example, if somebody has breast cancer and chemotherapy for breast cancer has a very, very high, it's a proven treatment with a very high success rate, a person wouldn't be allowed to say, I'm not having that, I am only having alternative medicine. If somebody wants to say, I will pursue traditional medicine alongside alternative medicine, that's their prerogative, that's absolutely permitted. If there is no traditional cure for it, if you've got an illness that there isn't a regular cure, then go gesundheit, pursue alternative medical ways. So that's a little bit of an oversight of some of the issues that crop up with the interface between medicine and halacha. This is really a very, very general overview. I've not gone into detail in any specific field. It may well be that we could do a follow-up with information on other areas, but this was just a very brief overview. Just to give you another example, actually, a beautiful example of how something in the Gemara, hundreds of years ago, sheds light on a medical issue which has only become relevant in recent times. If we look in the field of childbirth, medicine has made massive, massive strides, and it's now possible to look at all sorts of treatments to enable a couple who are struggling to have children. There may be a situation where the treatment involves something which isn't the normal relationship between a husband and wife. And the shaila is, what's the status of that child? Is that child, chas v'sholem, a mamzer? And this was an argument that divided the Rabbonim when this treatment first came out. The Satmarov was very clear that there's a Shasha Mamzeris there. The Igros Moshe was very clear that it's a Dover Maguna. It's a treatment that shouldn't be utilized. But if it is utilized, the child is kosher. What did they base it all on? They based it on a Gemara which talks about Nisabra Ba'ambati. When a woman has bathed in a pool of water where a man was there previously, and just to try and couch it in the most neutral terms, so a man was in the water previously, this man was not the woman's husband, and that woman became pregnant. Medically, and again, if somebody read that, they would think it's absolutely impossible. But let's tease out what's the underlying concept there. The underlying concept which applies to the halacha is you've got a situation, forget the actual reality of what was happening, but what's the fundamental issue here is somebody has had a child which is not from their own husband in a manner that was not the normal relationship between husband and wife. Is that child a mamzer? And if the maskana of Nisabra Ba'ambati is that that child is not a mamzer, then we can apply that same ruling, says Rav Moshe, to the case of this artificial insemination in the 20th century. So we see how a case mentioned in the Gemara hundreds of years ago can actually be used when we find out what the underlying concept is to address an issue of halacha in it that we face today that wasn't discussed black and white in the poskim. So I hope that's given you a little bit of overview. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm going to unmute you and give the opportunity for some questions to be asked. Let me just see how we do this. Unmute.
I think everybody could unmute themselves.
Okay. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, if anybody has got a question, if we can please ask them only one at a time. Has anybody got any questions they want to pose? Sorry, I see somebody's asked a question. Where does the patient's quality of life come in? I'm not talking about quality as in enjoying life, referring to a situation as intense, unrelenting, unmitigated pain. So I'm talking about, again, as we said earlier with regards to halacha, when a person has less than 6 months life expectancy, an incurable disease, an intense, unrelenting, unmitigated pain, then there are situations when a person may refuse treatment. To actively shorten life is not permitted in any situation. What's very interesting is that the countries where euthanasia is not allowed are the countries where palliative care is at its best. Countries where euthanasia is allowed, palliative care is often neglected. Now, this comes to another question. Are we allowed to administer palliative care, such as morphine, when there may be an incidental shortening of the patient's life? And the answer is that yes, as long as the painkillers that we are administering do not have the immediate effect of killing the patient, even though they may have the effect of perhaps slightly shortening the patient's life, the mitigation of pain is permitted by the administration of this painkillers. Are all vaccinations the same? Are all vaccinations the same? I'm not sure what you mean by all vaccinations. If you mean, is every vaccination mandatory? Not every vaccination is mandatory. There are some vaccinations which are for illnesses that are not contagious, such as cervical cancer. There's a vaccination for that nowadays. There's no chiyuv to have that vaccination. But in vaccination, such as MMR, and vaccinations for similar illnesses, if a vaccination was to be found for the coronavirus, those vaccinations would be absolutely obligatory.
Would there be some, like say for example, if they find a vaccination now, it'll be untested, unproven, it'll be an experiment. Are we required to participate in that?
the vaccinations, by the time the vaccinations get to the stage of being given to the mass public, they will have gone through the FDA and been tested. And that's why when you talk about vaccination, they normally find the vaccination pretty quickly into the process. They've then got to go through an intense process of testing before that can be allowed. Part of the problem is that sometimes, particularly now, they may be tempted to take shortcuts. Are we obligated to immediately take a vaccination? If the vaccination is not 100% tested, then no, because the chiyuv to save somebody else's life cannot be put. The Alter Rebbe writes that we can't enter into a sofek sakana to save somebody else's life. It's interesting that there's a whole debate with regards to donating kidneys. The mortality rate for donating a kidney is 0.03%. What's 0.03%? I'm not a mathematician. I think it's like 1 in, is it 1 in 20,000, something like that? Very, very, very low. So almost all Rabbanim say that is such a low chance that it's not even called sofek sakana. There are some Rabbanim who feel that it is still a sakana, and therefore, because the Rebbe wrote sofek sakana, there's a shaila about it. So when we talk about vaccinations, if a vaccination has been rushed through and hasn't been properly tested, then we're not mechoyev to be human guinea pigs for this. But if a vaccination has been thoroughly tested and approved, then we would be mechoyev to undertake that vaccination. In cases where doctors deem a treatment futile and refuse to treat, and likewise insurance refuses to fine, what lengths is one obligated to pursue possible treatment? The obligation to save your life, there's two questions. The question is, what chiyuv have you got to spend your own money? And what chiyuv do you have to spend your money on somebody else? Those are two totally separate shilas. There's an enormous amount of discussion around these two issues. Again, we don't have sufficient time to go into these questions at great length this evening. It's really the topic of another whole share in and of itself. And basically, yes, we do have a chiyuv to pursue the treatment. It depends, again, when we talk about deeming a treatment futile. There was a famous case here where there was a child who the doctors here said there was nothing could be done. And the parents wanted to take the doctor to America, and they said there's a treatment in America that can save their child. And the court in England refused to allow the patient. They said it's going to inflict pain, and there's no point in taking it. The doctor came over, and in the end, the doctor said, actually, I agree, the treatment is futile. I don't think it's going to do anything. You want to pay me to do it? I'll happily give the treatment, but I agree that there is no way that this treatment is going to save the patient. So we have to differentiate between emotion. Sometimes, indeed, unfortunately, there's no way b'derech hateva that the treatment will work, in which stage pursuing a treatment that b'derech hateva is not going to work and is only going to cause pain. That's the situation where only a Rebbe can give advice and turn around and say that this is a treatment when we say that. So it's a very, very difficult question when a treatment is deemed futile. A Rav Mumcha needs to be consulted as to exactly whether the doctors are indeed correct to take second and third opinions and so on. Somebody wrote about whether the Rebbe wrote sofek. This was not the Rebbe, this was the Alter Rebbe. The question is not whether it's a sofek or not. It's very clear, the Alter Rebbe has written, sofek sakana is forbidden. The shaila is whether nowadays the level of sofek or the level of risk is considered bichlal sofek. That's the question. The fact that we can't go into sofek sakana is a clear Alter Rebbe, and we can't ignore that. The question that we have to ask is the medical reality a sofek or not? And the vast majority of Rabbanim say that it is not even a sofek sakana, and that absolutely it's a tremendous thing to do. Many shluchim have donated their kidneys, and it's a tremendous mitzvah. That's the opinion of most Rabbanei Chabad. As I said, there are some who disagree, and you have to ask your own Rav before you embark on any serious medical decision. Do we have any other questions? not, then we will call this to a close. So last chance to ask a question. Okay, so thank you very much. And just remember again, sorry, one new message, somebody's just come up. In this particular matter, again, it's important in general when we look at the Hiraz. If you look, for example, at issues of fertility, this is an area which is an absolute minefield, but at the same time, the world has moved on dramatically over the past 20 years. The issue, for example, one of the major issues with fertility treatment is Shemira, is making sure that everything is done in the right manner and no mix-ups are made. And there was any doctor who says that no mix-ups happen is telling a lie. There have been a number of cases. There was a famous case in England which came to light quite simply because the white couple had a coloured child and the coloured couple had a white child. And at the time, the head of the human embryology agency here in England, responsible for regulation of fertility clinics, said that the reality is that there are more mix-ups than we know about. And this one hit the headlines because of its absolute clear reality. And Halocha very, very early on was demanding Shmira. There was kickback at the time from many of the clinics. Nowadays, virtually every clinic is prepared to accept Shmira. So it's a situation where the reality has changed. And if we look at the tshuvas where some of the Gedolim were very much against a particular treatment, that was because that the reality then was different. So correct, we cannot just take a general tshuva and extrapolate from that for every case. We have to look at what were the facts of that case. What is the fact now? I'll give you a classic example. In Eretz Yisrael, the Rav HaRoshi, the rabbinate, allows brain death, and they will retrieve organs from somebody who's been brain dead. So there are people, there's an organization called HODS. It's a great name, Halachic Organ Donor Society. It sounds really good. A general rule, the more Hebrew you mix in, often with hechsherim, people will put lots of Hebrew words in the hechsher, so somebody thinks it's a Mahadrin hechsher. So here they call themselves Halachic Organ Donor Society. They certainly are quite disingenuous, and they look and they often quote the Rav Rashi said it's okay. I was in discussion with both Rabbi Professor Steinberg and Dr. Mordechai Halpin, two of the leading doctors and Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael who were involved in this, and they said very, very clearly that the situation in Eretz Yisrael does not necessarily transmit to other parts of the world. I know certainly in England, I'm not talking about America or anyone else, but I can tell you that in England, they said to me black and white that the heter that they gave in Eretz Yisrael does not apply in England. And therefore, we cannot extrapolate and say one situation is the same as another. The fact that somebody has given a psak in one particular situation does not cross over to another situation. You need to look at every single parameter of the psak and every single parameter of the medical situation. Now, somebody said they'd like to recognize that most medical ethicists are not disrespectful of life, more attuned to the halachic perspective than farther away from it. That's correct. They wouldn't be ethicists if they didn't care. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the secular values diverge from halacha, and where we see the value in every moment of life, many secular ethicists will struggle to accept, will accept that. And therefore, yes, correct, ethicists are indeed respectful of life. They wouldn't be in the field if they weren't, but it doesn't mean that their decisions and their discussions always in line with halacha. So on that note, we will conclude with a bracha for refuah shalema, ukrova for all those that need it, that there should be refuah shalema, and we should all be zeichet to the geula shalema. Ve'kitzu ranu treich ne'ofer, take it from Yad Mamash.
Thank you. Shkach.